about time to get going today, and I'd like to introduce our speaker. He's Pastor Trevor Hislop. He's the pastor of worship arts at Church of Viera, my church. And he came to our church at a time when everybody's kind of hurt a little bit. You know, there's a little fraction there. And there couldn't have been any better to heal it up. He's got such a great tender heart. He's a great speaker, great worship artist, and just a great guy all around. Y'all welcome Trevor.
Thank you guys. It's an honor to be with you for lunch today. Bill mentioned my name is Trevor over at Church of Viera. I've been there for 6 years and love being a part of not only the church but also being a part of this community. So again, great to be with you guys today. Love hearing just before we got started, you guys just connecting with one another, building those relationships, fellowshipping with one another is so important, so significant in our lives, but also for the life of this group and in our community. So I want to talk to you guys a bit today about discipling, about mentoring, about what that means in our lives and how we're investing into the lives of others. And so I want to just kick this off, giving you guys to maybe just stay at your tables, just talk for a moment. Question, I actually ran my staff through this last week, and it was really intriguing to hear some of this. So I want you guys to experience that. And that is just take a moment at the table where you are and just identify, if you would, each one of you, somebody who is influential in your life. Okay? So just imagine maybe there's a couple people, most influential people in your life. And just maybe share their name, and then just give a reason why. Why were they so important to you? Or maybe they still are important to you. And then I'll pick us back up in just a moment. So again, just take a moment at your tables with your groups. Talk again about someone who is most influential in your life.
How about you, Michael?
All right, let's go ahead and put it back together. Not everybody got to share everything. I know, yeah, it's hard to get. Awesome. Hey, it's great though. It's hard to get y'all not talking, right? Especially as guys, right? It's hard to get us talking in the first place, but awesome that it's even more difficult to get us to stop talking. Okay, so as I've asked you guys, again, identify somebody in your life who was most influential to you. Hopefully, again, you got to share some of those stories. You got to start to think a little bit about who that was and why. For some people, they have easier inroads, I think, than others to be an influence in the lives of others. And yet we all have, whether you identify yourself as not, we all have these opportunities. And so again, when I talk about mentoring, maybe some of you are more familiar with the idea of discipling, basically an investment into, again, the hearts and lives of someone else with some intentionality. So when we think about mentoring, that's, again, it's not something that comes naturally for many of us. So you just have to think about why don't we prioritize that? Why don't we do that? Whether that's that we want to be a mentee and we want to receive the gift of mentoring from someone, or rather we are the ones who are doing the mentoring and we're willing and wanting to pour into someone. And there are some just really kind of core, basic reasons for that. And they really come around the idea of self-security. There are a couple of those reasons which we maybe have too much security, which would be related to pride. We think, hey, I don't want somebody to tell me what to do. I don't really need someone to speak into my life. Those would be the areas where we're saying, hey, no thank you, I don't need that, don't want that. And that often comes out of the heart of pride.
Word for word.
What's that?
Word for word.
Yeah, right. The other side is perhaps an insecurity. It's meaning I don't have enough value or I don't see enough worth in myself. So in this case, these you are individuals who are saying, hey, why in the world would somebody want to hear what I have to say? Why, or is there anything in me that I would really have value to pour into someone else? Okay, so those are the areas of maybe insecurity. But again, often wraps around this idea of, again, self-insecurity. Unfortunately, one of the most common ones, in fact, this happens often in workplace is this insecurity of somebody getting the upper hand, meaning job security, right? Like, why would I pour into somebody if that's going to jeopardize my future with this organization, this company, or any of those things? We have to recognize that is flawed thinking. In fact, we're going to talk about this in just a moment. This idea of reserving what we have, not pouring it into others for our own selfish gain or benefit. When we talk about mentoring, it's all over in the Bible, but we often just don't see it with that word mentoring in front of it. But if you look all throughout Scripture, there are these mentoring relationships, there's these mentoring verses and stories. In fact, one of the most common for men and men's groups like this comes from Proverbs, right? It says, iron sharpens iron as one man sharpens another. We read that, but we often don't take the time to really understand what that means. Or in Proverbs, there's also another one that says, train up your child in the way which it will go, and they will not stray from it. I want to talk in Exodus, story about Jethro and Moses. This is an example of a relationship between a father-in-law and a son. I want to just read these verses for you. This passage is often used when talking about leadership, delegation, but we want to specifically look at these verses as it relates to this idea of mentorship. So in Exodus 18 picks up where Jethro says, "Hey, I'm going to go visit my daughter and my son-in-law," which is Moses. So he gets there, he greets them, they have this great interaction. Again, it's all of this is founded in relationship here between a father-in-law and a son. I'm going to pick this up in chapter 18 in Exodus, verse 13. So it says, "The next day Moses took his seat to serve as the judge for the people, and they stood around him from morning till evening. When his father-in-law saw that Moses was doing for the people, he said, 'What is it that you are doing for this people? Why are you alone sitting as the judge, while all the people stand around you from morning till evening?'" Okay, so just pause there. So what's happening again is Jethro is coming in, he's observing something, and he's asking these questions. Why in the world are you doing this all by yourself? And these people are here, they're wearing you out. You're here from the early hours of the morning to the wee hours of the evening. Moses answered him, "Because the people come to seek the Lord's will. Whenever they have a dispute, it is brought to me, and I decide between parties to inform them of God's decrees and laws." So Moses' father-in-law replied, "What you're doing is not good. You and these people who came out to wear yourselves out, the work is too heavy for you. You cannot handle it alone. Listen now to me, and I will give you some advice, and may God be with you. You must be the people's representative before God and bring their disputes to him. So teach them the decrees and the laws, and show them the way to live and the duties that they are to perform." So just to pause there. So again, what Jethro is saying to Moses is, again, you can't do this all on your own. You need to teach and train, or essentially mentor, disciple these people in the laws, in the decrees, in the ways of the Lord. And then he goes and says, "And select capable men from who are people, men who fear God, who are trustworthy people, who hate dishonest gain, and appoint them as officials over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens." So he's saying, hey, build a team around you. Gather these guys, pour into them, allow them to pour into others. So have them serve as judge of people over all the times. Have them bring every difficult case to you. The simple cases can be decided themselves. This will lighten your load because they will share it with you. If you do this and God so commands you, you will be able to stand and abstain, and all their people will go home satisfied. Moses listened to his father-in-law and did everything he said. He chose capable men from all Israel and made them leaders of all people, officials of thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. They served as judges of the people of all times. The difficult cases they brought to Moses, but the simple ones they decided themselves. Then Moses sent his father-in-law on his way. Jethro returned to his own country. Okay, so again, a couple things just to point out here. One is that this came through a relationship. Again, this was the father-in-law Jethro who came to the son Moses. Hey, there's something happening here. Let me teach you train you. Okay? I didn't mention this, but if you go back earlier in the early verses, you'll see that Jethro is a ruler. He is a leader of leaders in his own country. And so when he comes to Moses, he's speaking into his life with wisdom because he cares for him, because he loves him. And then you see where he says to Moses, hey, listen to me, let me teach you this. Moses has to have a teachable spirit. He has to have a humble heart to receive this, in which he does. Jethro says, pour into the people. Love them, care for them, teach them. And he says, identify these leaders. Pour into them. Allow them to pour into the other leaders. And then by the end there, Jethro implements. He doesn't just nod his head and say, yep, okay, yeah, sounds great. Now go home. But it shows that there's follow-through, that Moses says, yes, this is good, this is wise. And he implements that, teaches and trains the people, develops a team, pours into those leaders, and then at the end there's this ending of honor and respect, where he does this, and then he sees his father-in-law off. Okay? The Bible is full of examples in relationships, again, where mentoring where it takes place. And so, again, this example of Jethro and Moses. So if you remember, if you kind of follow through that story later on, Moses then pours into Joshua. You see Eli pour into Samuel. Samuel pours into David. David pours into his son Solomon. You see these generational patterns that happened. Elijah into Elisha. Most notably in the New Testament, of course, Jesus. He gathers the 12. He says, hey, I'm going to pour into you. The 12 then pours into hundreds of people. Eventually, as you go through the New Testament, you get to Paul. Paul pours into Titus, into Timothy, into Euphrates, and many other faithful men. In fact, there's a verse later in the New Testament where it says, as Timothy poured into, again, use words, many faithful men. This essentially becomes the foundation of the church. Just recognizing this was God's plan all along. Again, that there would be a generational pouring into the next generation, into the next generation, into the next generation. And that's the forming and the foundation, again, of the church. And it's no different in the 21st century, that we have to be recipients of it, and then we have to be the ones that are carrying it and bringing it to the next generations. I mentioned just a bit ago in Proverbs where it says, train up your child in the way in which they will go. And in old age they will not depart from it. Again, these are important things for us. So as we start to think about this idea of mentoring, just want to just give you a couple of kind of takeaways today, or a couple thoughts about that. Again, mentoring isn't something that just comes second nature to many of us. So I want to give you just a couple tips, leave you with a couple thoughts before we wrap up. First, I should have mentioned this when I started. I've been in pastoral ministry for I think this is my 16th year of ministry. Before that, I was a marriage and family therapist. Before that, I was a life coach. Before that, I was a hospital chaplain. And so I had a lot of opportunities along the way to kind of pour into people, particularly those years that I was working as a life coach or as a marriage and family therapist. And so this particular topic is just near and dear to me for that reason. So when we think of this idea of mentoring, many of us think it has to be some formalized process or some formalized relationship. And it can happen that way, but it doesn't have to happen only that way. Many of us are husbands, many of us are fathers. I mean, there are just those normal and natural ways for us to pour into people that are closest to us. If we're not married or if we don't have kids, we still have family and close friends around us in which we can do that. When we think about this idea of mentoring, and we read the story with Moses, there's a posturing that has to happen for us. The first is we have to be humble. We have to really be able to receive what God wants to speak to us through the lives of others. But there's also a humility that comes when God uses us to speak into the lives of others. That we have to be able to take that and say, God has given me something to say, something to share, and I humbly submit it, through the work of the Holy Spirit. and offer that to someone in our lives. Just a couple tips for mentoring. Let me just know for mentoring, for some of us in our room, in this room, we span multiple generations here. And there are very different ways that we approach the generations when we're receiving from one another, when we're offering or pouring into one another. And so we just have to be really hypersensitive and mindful, again, how we receive things and how we then, in turn, share these things. But again, a few tips for this idea of mentoring. The first is just be intentional. I think it's kind of like an obvious and it's a given, like most things in our life, we just have to be intentional about it. Because for so many of us, we all can walk out of here today, we're like, yep, mentoring is a great idea, but I don't have time for it, I don't have energy for it. And the reality is it just will never happen if it's not intentional. Another tip for mentoring is we need to approach it as something that's personal, something that is an opportunity for ministry. I think for many of us, particularly if you work in an environment or maybe had worked in an environment where mentoring essentially was a program or it was a professional development sequence. Mentoring does happen that way. Apprenticeships happen that way, right? But again, when we think about mentoring as a whole, we need to think of it as part of, again, who we are. We need to think about it as a way of ministry. It may be a particular skill set in the job that we have, yes, but let's not limit it to that. Again, think of it in a greater way. A few things I want to share with you. These are probably a little bit more pointed to the next generation, because I think a lot of us scratch our head and say, how in the world am I ever going to connect with those Gen Xers, those millennials? There's no way they ever want to hear from me, or there's no way what I have to say even applies to them, and or vice versa. I can tell you I'm at the edge of the Gen X age bracket. Yeah.
Can I add something to that?
Yeah.
The person that I actually admire more than anybody is Pedro Garcia.
Mm-hmm.
He's a different generation than me, and I was not expecting when I started working in 2000 auto that he literally just opened up to me and started knocking down my walls with a similar issue that I had and he had it as well. And somehow or another, me and him were able to connect on that, and he proceeded from that to actually reminding me where I need to be and what path I need to be on. And I understand what you're saying. Dealing with a different generation is seriously hard to digest and figure out where to address it and everything. I have my girlfriend and her kids, and I'm trying to find some common grounds with them, but it's kind of hard unless you dig a little bit or you introduce them to something that you think they might actually be interested in to do so.
Yeah.
It's a time-consuming process.
It is. That's great. Thank you for sharing. I mean, it takes intentionality, just you're sharing, the personal story is that you're able to break through the generational stuff, right? And I think there's hope in that message. Is that we don't have to grow. Yeah, we don't have to be stuck in, hey, I can only speak to the people in this age bracket, or only speak to these people with these experiences, or be hindered by these things that we feel every day, just in our culture. Yeah, that's awesome. Also, just to be shared, it's time consuming. It takes investment, and that is something that we have to be willing to do. It also takes humility, again, on your part to be able to receive that, on his part to be able to step out a little bit into that relationship. So again, when we talk about a few of these things that are good for all of us, but again, just helping us mindful again of some of our next generation coming behind us. One is it's called crowdsource mentoring. Now, some of you are like, what in the world is crowdsource mentoring? Crowdsource mentoring, here's the idea. So, for many of our generations, we had the professional in our lives was the only professional we knew in that particular area. As an example, when you went to church, there was the preacher, and whatever the preacher said, that was in your world, your limited knowledge and view took that as truth. If you went to the workplace, you went to the doctor, you went to any specialist anywhere, that specialist was your source of truth. Okay. Now, fast forward to the world we live in now, and the generations that are coming behind us, they have the internet, right? So this idea of crowdsourced mentoring is, I no longer have one person speaking that truth into my life. I have as many as I can imagine, because the resources of that are so different today than they were at a time in the past. So an example, what happened to me as I mentor a couple of the guys kind of coming up under me, is I often encourage them, hey, go do your research. Go find out what we're talking about and what I'm saying to be true. You know, expand your view, do more work here on your own. Okay? So for us to embrace that, to say, hey, again, when we do pour into somebody, that we can say there is a wealth of resource, there is a wealth of knowledge out there. Let's take advantage of that. Okay? So again, that's what this in this generation what we're calling crowdsource mentoring. It's also the idea of using external mentors. Some of you may have a mentor at a distance. That's another way to say it. Somebody that you really admire, somebody that's really spoken into your life. An example, Billy Graham. I don't know that any of us had a personal relationship with Billy Graham, but I'd say most, if not all of us, have been influenced or essentially mentored by somebody like Billy Graham. Okay, that's the idea of an external mentor, or again, what we used to call mentor at a distance. Okay. One of the things that's very important in mentoring, again, across generations, but one thing that is emerging with our coming generations, is the idea of focusing in on morals, value, and honesty. I think for many of us, we would speak to facts and figures, and we would start with the head knowledge. And that's changing. That's just changing with our cultures, with our time. These things are still important. But when we take a posture of mentoring, where we're receiving it and where we're giving it, that we have to be mindful of the heart. Another thing that's important is what we're calling reverse mentoring or cross-generational mentoring. This is the idea that it doesn't always have to be the older, more seasoned person mentoring the younger, less seasoned person. Okay? That it can go both ways. I mean, how many of us have picked up a piece of technology and we have no idea what to do with it? And so we go to a kid, a teenager, and we say, teach us how to use it. Yeah. And in that moment, they're mentoring us, right? And we need to fully embrace that. We need to know that there are things that are happening in our world today that the next generation is teaching us. But also be fully confident that there are things in our world today that we get to speak into, teach, train, and mentor our next generation, okay? So again, that's called cross-generational, or again, we sometimes call reverse mentoring. Reverse meaning the younger person gets to speak into, or in some cases, mentor the other. Another idea along that thought is the disregard of power or position. I think it's the traditional mindset that the person with more power or with higher position must be the one that has all the wealth of knowledge and wisdom to impart on the person without power or position. Okay? Again, that's the same idea that we can think differently in a broader way. Another one is support informal mentoring. The idea that mentoring can just happen naturally through relationships. Now, I think there are some program-based mentoring that is really effective, has a lot of great things happening there, but also, I said, recognize that mentoring can happen in a very informal way. In fact, the Bible has many examples where it says, basically just living by example. The best way to mentor is to model. But just the everyday things that we do, again, they're informal in nature. But people watch us. People see what we're doing. And those people that we're pouring into, they take note and they take notice of those things. So again, embrace the idea of informal mentoring. Okay. just before we go, I want to just ask you guys, you don't have to do this as a group, you don't have to write this down, but just kind of as a mental note to yourself if you would. Again, when we hear stuff like this, we kind of say, yep, that was great, thanks for the wonderful lunch, thanks for coming and giving us the pep talk, and then we go on our way, and then we come back next week and say, what did we talk about last week? So just as we go, as we kind of wrap this up, and I'm going to share this and then pray for us, I just want to challenge you, if you would, do a few things. One is, first of all, identify if there's somebody in your life right now that you could be mentoring. Or maybe you already are mentoring them, but maybe it's just a more intentional way of mentoring. Or maybe you're taking one of the tips that I shared with you that you could use in a mentoring relationship. Okay, so that's the first one. Identify someone that you could mentor. Two is identify somebody in your life who could mentor you. I think it's much easier for us to do the first than it is the second. It's easier for us to say, hey, who can I go find and pour myself into? Rather than who would I be willing to submit myself to? And that I would invite them into my life and allow them to mentor me. And then the last thing is just an action item. It's just, okay, so identify those two people in your life and then just make a commitment to yourself to step out and take that action. To say, okay, God, I recognize that you want to speak to me. You want to use others in my life. You want to use me in the lives of others. I understand and I recognize that this is how your plan works. In Psalms, where it says, one generation will commend your works to another. It's this idea that generation, I shared this at the beginning, after generation after generation after generation is going to keep pouring into the next generation.
Amen.
And so we just, as men, whether it be in our homes, in our community, in our workplace, and wherever God has given us opportunity to give influence, that we need to commit ourselves to this process. So let me pray for us. God, thank you for each of these men here today. God, thanks for the way that you are working in us. God, thanks for the way that you're working through us. God, thanks for the relationships that are already happening, whether they're formalized or informal, where you're allowing us to be poured into or pour into the lives of others. Jesus, we just want to place you at the center of it all. God, that in these relationships that God, that you are the one that is being lifted up. God, whatever relational opportunities you provide to us, God, whatever mentoring avenues you provide, God, that you would be present there. Lord, just give us a heart of humility, or give us a spirit of intentionality to be a part of what you're doing, of how you're growing your kingdom, and how you're working in the lives and the hearts of others. Lord, just pray things in your name. Amen. Amen. Thank you.
Trevor, thank you very much for sharing my views on mentoring. I think we all need that. And I like your ending thing. We need to make a commitment. Just do it. Like what Mikey, just do it. Anyway, next week we have another guy who is probably an expert on mentoring. He's built, as you guys all know, Brian Lytle. Brian is the guy that started F.U.E.L. how many years ago?
8, at least.
At least 8 years ago. They had 5 in the, you probably know, they had 5 in the county at one time, and then Brian and his business got so busy. But anyway, Brian will be here next week. So be sure to invite your friends. You're going to teach us on coaching and his business and mentoring. So again, remember Sundays, Bill brought the jar. If you want to put your donation contribution in the jar for Sundays, that would be great. And I'll leave it on the table. That's fine too. But anyway, thanks you guys for coming. All right. See you next week.